Good morning, everyone. I'm Monica Keller, the Chief Marketing Officer at WHC, and I'm pleased to WHC Connect, our first virtual conference ever. We are so excited to host these 2 days of inspiration, learning, and celebration, so thank you for joining us. When you're in the WHC Connect app, be sure to take a look around and engage with our exhibit hall where you can speak directly with exhibitors. Check out the community section where you can direct message other attendees. And the activity stream is where we will post messages and information and where you can post messages to the community as well. And of course, please join us for all of our keynote and general sessions. All of this is coming to you live through the generosity of our sponsors, so please indulge me while I mention them. Our platinum sponsor is ExxonMobil. Gold sponsors, Exelon, Ontario Power Generation, and Toyota. Our silver sponsors are Bacardi, BASF, Chemours, Chevron, DTE Energy, Freeport-McMoRan, and Coke. Our general sponsors are Ernst Seeds, Lehigh Hansen, and Vulcan Materials. Thank you to all of our WHC Connect sponsors. We could not do this without your support. Okay, so let's begin our program. Please welcome WHC President Margaret O'Gorman.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's really great to see you virtually. I'm really pleased to open this session of WHC Connect, and I look forward to a fascinating discussion with our distinguished panel in a little bit. I and everyone at WHC is sorely missing seeing you in Baltimore this year, but we look forward to getting together again sometime in the future. And we're really looking forward, I think, to the future in general. What a year 2020 has been for all of us. It has been a year without precedent and a year that has challenged us all in both personal and professional capacities. There are many ways to describe this year and how we survived it. For WHC, one of our key words was pivot. When the pandemic shut the world down, our first thought was about how we would continue to support our programs across the globe. We immediately tried to get a handle on the potential impacts to the conservation programs across our community. We realized that for different industries, different geographies, and different regulations, we needed to pivot to virtual support and to embrace flexibility with conservation certification applications so that the respective challenges of our applicants could be taken into consideration. We hoped that the pivot to virtual support and the addition of a COVID provision to our certification requirements would allow you to maintain the recognition and apply for certification by our July deadline. And you did not disappoint. Despite the pandemic, despite restrictions at operations, despite reduced workforces and suddenly vanished budgets, we received applications from 86 programs by July 15th of this year. Of these programs, 68 were renewal applications and 18 were new certifications. This new number is really heartening to see in 2020 when the urge to retreat must have been very strong. More programs have been active this year than those that sought certification. We have met the needs of 3,000 visits to our certification support site, so we anticipate a big crop of late year applicants by mid-December. When all these program applications in 2020 are broken into their respective projects, we've kept our reviewers busy, doing 524 project reviews so far this year. To everyone who submitted applications for our early deadline, thank you so much. These applications will be added to the second phase applications in mid-December and will be recognized as an annual cohort in 2021. But these applications are also eligible for our 2020 only Pandemic Recognition Ibis Award, which I'll be presenting in a few minutes. This award was designed to recognize a program team or individual who prevailed in adverse conditions, and we received some wonderful stories about resilience that we can all celebrate. But for the purposes of this meeting, we will be concentrating our awards on the applications we received between July 16th and the end of December in 2019. That's projects from 209 program applications are up for award consideration during WHC Connect. So make sure you attend the award presentations to see if you, your colleagues, or your competitors have prevailed. Given all of these cohort years and projects and programs, really the bottom line that we need to celebrate today is that WHC recognizes 664 corporate conservation programs across 97 companies in 25 countries worldwide. Our corporate conservation community is strong and has remained so in the face of many challenges this year. So please give yourselves a pat on the back, a round of applause, or a socially distant group hug. So as I mentioned earlier, pivot has been one of our keywords this year, and we learned a lot from pivoting. We learned that our long-time laser-like focus on supporting our members' efforts allowed us a place to pivot to. When the country went into a lockdown and many working parents were home with their children seeking educational and entertaining resources, we very quickly pivoted to create kid-friendly webinars, with one of our first kid-centric webinars, Birds and Butterflies in Your Back Garden, seeing almost 1,600 registrants and generating enormous feedback. When the less nimble environmental education groups finally caught up with us and started to offer kid-centric content, we once again pivoted, leaving the field to them and refocusing our education efforts on our program teams across the world. This year to date, we've offered 17 webinars on a variety of topics of interest to our members, and we've reached an audience of over 8,000 registrants watching live or on demand so far. This is a tremendous increase in viewership this year, and while some of it has been driven by our new work lives, much has also been driven by the keen content we've curated that has ranged from STEM education around water conservation to climate resiliency, and new webinars on pollinator and bat conservation, adding to the pollinator and bat content we've been offering for many years. We have webinars planned for the rest of the year, and our live and on-demand webinars remain free of charge thanks to the generosity of our sponsors. And it's not just WHC members who enjoy our webinars. We are increasingly seeing employees from federal agencies like the US Fish and Wildlife Service and the US Forest Service, and NGO partners from across the globe, all attending and all learning what corporate conservation implementation really looks like. And corporate conservation is what we are all about. Our pivot to virtual support of our conservation teams saw our strategy and planning consulting department deliver on 130 requests for support, with 170 requests pending in the pipeline. The support ranged from strategic planning, toolkits, program mapping, and technical support in North America, South America, Asia, and Europe. We're still hoping for a call from Australia. We aligned impressive biodiversity projects on Indigenous lands to our own certification framework. We helped Crestwood, a midstream company, develop a biodiversity position to satisfy its ESG aspirations. We directly supported initiation of new conservation programs far and wide, from a discontinued property in Tennessee owned by Ashland to a bear research facility in Argentina and a technology center in Maui. We developed toolkits for BASF, Shell, and Cemex, as well as for large tech companies' data centers worldwide. And we advise a family-owned buildings and materials company on how to integrate biodiversity and education into a cohesive approach for local quarries and other operations. We worked along the supply chain, supporting efforts from the extractive industries to processing and manufacturing, utilities and transportation, and tech and waste management. Beyond the pandemic and the pivot, it's been a busy year for us at WHC. We welcomed 6 new members in 2020, corporate members Loast, North America, Peckham Industries, Lannon Stone Products, and Crestwood. A trade association, the National Rural Electric Cooperative, and a conservation partner, the Chicago Regional Trees Initiative. We introduced nature-based solutions to a conference of climate professionals in Detroit in March, when we led the first ever panel on the subject at the Climate Leadership Conference. We've continued to support the Suppliers Partnership for the Environment, in their innovative approach to driving biodiversity action along the automotive supply chain. We joined the Business for Nature International Initiative as a conservation partner, and more about that tomorrow. And we've been awarded a grant in a prestigious and competitive competition with the US Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Program. That will see us work in Detroit, Phoenix, and the Calumet region in Newark, New Jersey, to develop a best practices approach for corporate community forestry. We've also been awarded another significant grant in support of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which will see us and our members plant 500 trees in the Port of Illinois in East Chicago. Some of this work will be touched on in the forestry panel later today. Through our services, our grant applications, our webinars and storytelling, we continue to bring nature to the forefront during a year with so many distractions and so many challenges. But we also took advantage of the slowdown in our lives to take some time in nature, and I hope you did too. When our lives became curtailed, when travel was grounded, when retail was shuttered, sport was sent to the sidelines, and culture was muted, nature carried on. Nature was there to greet us as spring unfolded in March in the Northern Hemisphere, and recently again in the Southern Hemisphere. Families and individuals who have lived overscheduled lives suddenly found time and space to look around and appreciate the certainty of nature in an uncertain world. The education and entertainment that nature provides, and most importantly, the solace that nature can bring in a time of high stress and anxiety. So going forward, we remain operating without a blueprint. 2021 is an unknown quantity. The future is still a challenge. But during this time of global crisis, nature will remain part of the solution, as it always has been, and WHC will remain to support your efforts and pivot to meet your needs. Thank you very much. So it's now the first presentation of an award during this meeting. I'm very pleased to be able to present this. We conceived the special 2020 Ibis Award earlier this year in recognition of the fact that many programs would be operating under curtailed circumstances. So we conceived of this new award to recognize a program that has demonstrated resiliency of spirit and advancement of conservation despite shutdowns, quarantines, and changes in the workplace. The winning program showed this spirit when 2 employees volunteered to keep the conservation program going when employee access to the site was restricted. This 2-person team continued monitoring during the monitoring season, the Bluebird program on site. They rotated their schedules so the monitoring could be effective. They adhered to the regulations on site that restricted only 1 person in a golf cart at a time to allow 1 person to go and monitor the Bluebird program instead of 2. One of the employees took home monarch caterpillars and chrysalises, and they watched 16 monarchs hatch from the employee's garden. They organized a virtual Earth Day event and provided milkweed seed packets to every employee. And they also adapted the site. Because of spatial restrictions, parking at the location was sent to a distant part of the site. And this necessitated employees to take a long walk along a back pathway to the facility. So the wildlife team sought and received permission and budget to install satellite pollinator gardens along this pathway to provide pollinator habitat, but also to increase the health and well-being of stressed employees. So at a location where the majority of employees were working from home, where other employees were working long hours as the operation pivoted from its normal product to sanitizer products for the pandemic, these employees engaged nature and brought nature back. So I am honored to present our first WHC Ibis Award to the Bacardi Bottling Corporation in Jacksonville, Florida. And here to accept it is Cara Bogdan, Senior Beverage Scientist, Bacardi Martini. Congratulations, Cara.
Thank you so much. Although Bacardi is a well-recognized global name within the spirits industry, we are a family-owned company. We take great pride in our conservation efforts, which date back to our founding in 1862 when Facundo Bacardi used recycled oak barrels to age his rum. Our foundation is based on 3 core pillars within our culture: family, being fearless, and having a founder's mentality. Stemming from these values, one of the passions for the Bacardi Jacksonville team is conservation. We are an all-volunteer team on a 92-acre campus that bottles more than 8.9 million 9-liter cases of spirits for the United States and around the world. We recognize the importance of giving back to the environment what we take. As Margaret was saying, during the pandemic, when our plant transitioned to produce hand sanitizer for local medical facilities, and a majority of our employees were working from home, 2 of our Green Team volunteers were able to go back to campus to help with essential work, but also keep our wildlife programs alive. This is truly a thrill to be recognized by the WHC for the Ibis Award. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cara, and congratulations. And I am sure if you could hear it, there is a round of applause happening across the world with all of our attendees right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our first panel, and we're so lucky to have 3 great leaders for the first panel of WHC Connect. And we're going to talk about mainstreaming biodiversity and the challenges of mainstreaming biodiversity. And for those of you who are not familiar with that term, mainstreaming biodiversity is a concept. It's a concept for how government, industry, and even humanity should think about nature in a way that's integrated and not separated to it. And in the terms of industry, it's about working with nature and integrating nature, mainstreaming it across operations. And it's something we need to do to address the global biodiversity crisis, and something we're going to talk about this morning with our 3 speakers, who I will introduce now. So our first speaker is our first panelist. We're not doing presentations, this is a conversation. Our first panelist is Anne Bartuska. Anne is a senior advisor at Resources for the Future, which is an environmental economics think tank in Washington, D.C., where she focuses on sustainable forest management and natural climate solutions. And prior to Resources for the Future, Anne held leadership positions at the USDA and US Forest Service. So welcome, Anne. Many of you will know our second panelist, Bill Cobb. Bill is in his 2nd term as chair of WHC's Board of Directors. He's been on the board since 2012. Bill has been the recently named Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Freeport-McMoRan, one of the world's largest producers of copper and molybdenum. And his team encompasses many sites of WHC certifications and topic areas that include reclamation, remediation, discontinued operations, social investment, human rights, and sustainability reporting. So welcome, Bill. It's nice to see you. Our 3rd panelist today is Dominique De Becker. And Dominique is the Deputy Chief Sustainable Officer at Solvay, a global leader in materials, chemicals, and solutions. His primary focus is on supplier and customer stakeholder, and he supervises the necessary transformation towards circular economy. Dominique also sits on the board of CSR Europe and at the Operations Committee of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So welcome, Dominique. So this panel is designed to kind of just have a conversation. But if there are questions from the audience, we will take those through the question function in the GoToWebinar control panel. But I'm just going to start off this with the question to Bill. Well, to all 3. So given your sphere of interest and influence, what do you see are the main barriers to mainstreaming biodiversity action across business sectors? And Bill, I'll ask you that question first.
Thanks, Margaret, and good morning to everybody that's in attendance. So whilst we frame the question as barriers, it's also an opportunity. And what I'm going to say for a couple of minutes is that while my comments are really things that likely happen at the corporate level, biodiversity and the data around biodiversity and everything that happens, it all happens at the site level. And so those of you that are site practitioners, take heart. All those efforts actually get aggregated up and communicated to a whole variety of stakeholders. And that's what I want to start with. Customers, particularly for our products, and I'm thinking automotive and electronics sector customers. So think Apple, think major car manufacturers. Created a program several years ago that incorporated 32 topics in what defines sustainable or responsible sourcing and production of materials. One of those topics is biodiversity, and how you go about protecting, enhancing habitats was one of those 32 criteria. Things have happened since that point in time. We now see a whole range of stakeholders, including the financial community, starting to understand and ask questions about, while they frame it in what they call ESG, environmental, social, and governance. Nonetheless, they're trying to understand, where does biodiversity fit within that E element of ESG, and how do we measure it? And what we find is, in fact, some of our WHC certifications and the programs we implement are the ways that we demonstrate how you measure success in that biodiversity space. But the primary focus of the investor community as of late has been on climate, a lot of interest on carbon and climate. And of course, water goes right hand in hand with climate. I was chairing an environment committee meeting of the International Council of Mining and Metals this morning, quite early this morning. And one of our topics was, how is the stakeholder community going to move from climate, water, and biodiversity being the next big thing that people want to talk about? And one of the things we're monitoring, and I'll come back to it later comments, and I'll turn this to the other panel members here in a second. The nature-based conservation organizations are trying to mirror what the financial community did with carbon disclosures. And there's going to be a conversation next year about potentially the creation of a disclosure framework around biodiversity. And if in fact that framework gets legs, it will really bring more to the conversation and really provide some context for the question that Margaret started this panel with. So let me stop there, and Margaret, we can shift to other panel members. And Dominique, I'll let you pick it up from here and provide your insights.
Good morning, everyone. Please apologize. English is not my native language, as you will figure out all. Solvay is a chemical company. It's the mother of the industry. We're selling product everywhere. And in the same time, it's also very difficult to understand what's the value, the environmental value, the social value of the product. Many years ago, we because of a family-owned business, etc., we realized that sustainability is at the center of the company, and we decided to look at it not only as a thing that comes aside, a cherry on the cake, but something that is very central in the way we do business and we do operate the business. Meaning that today, as an example, we have an internal tool being audited externally, but the results being audited, €1 revenue on 2, we are a European-based company, you will figure out, is made in solution to unmet needs, sustainability needs, social-wise, environmental-wise, among others, biodiversity is included there, that are thought by the community around us. So all start with the consumer, and you mentioned that, Bill, quite clearly. The Apple, it's not just because of, and all the brand names, it's not because of the problems they will see their name in the newspaper if something is going wrong. So the compliance side of it, it's also because they realize that there is a value, a positive value that is seen in the product they sell, to their consumers. That positive value from the consumers going back to us really drives our innovation, the way we do operate, so that we do match those unmet needs. We look at those tendencies in the marketplace, including the one on biodiversity, and I will detail this a little bit more later. But we're looking at all those sustainability topics, environmental-wise again, social-wise, looking at when we do develop a solution somewhere, you cannot create a problem somewhere else. When you go circular, as an example, and you cannot have the smartphones being dismantled by kids in India without any kind of protection, just to illustrate, to make the point. So that overall idea of we need to have a company that is matching the needs outside. Biodiversity, when it came on our agenda, exactly for the reason you described, Bill, it becomes important to the world, to all the stakeholders, and we were like a chicken, sorry, with a knife. What can we do about it? This is by far too complex. Do we have to count how much pieces? Yes, but our operation or not, the biggest impact might be on the outside world. And so we realize, okay, first we have to figure out what does that mean for us. And so because we do have all the data available, environmental-wise, we have 96% of the revenue of the company, the product we are selling, with a detailed environmental footprint, life cycle assessment. We looked in that database and realized, well, God, there are 4 causes that explain 80% of our impact on biodiversity, applying the LCA thinking. Climate change, acidification, eutrophication, and marine ecotoxicity. Okay, now we do have elements we can act on in selecting our raw materials, in operating our sites, because we can link it back to where the impacts are generated, the pressure on biodiversity is generated, but also we can link it back to demand from our customers, and we can engage conversation on those specific topics, so we create an embryo of maturity on the topic. Now, today, we do have a target, overall target in the company, reducing by 30% the pressure on biodiversity by 2030. We start to work on that, acting on those 4 elements. Again, repeating, not creating other problems somewhere else, not displacing the problems, and starting from that very global, holistic perspective, so top-down, if we may say. It's to engage with the sites and the employee, because at the end of the day, the global objectives are always implemented locally, in order to and engage also with our suppliers and in the next phase with our customers, at least some of them, in order to underline what it is that we can do in order to improve at the end of the day on biodiversity restoration, and possibly also commitment to net zero impact on biodiversity on the longer term when the metrics will have been developed.
Thank you, Dominique. So this, we're moving from Bill talking about investor pressure and frameworks to Dominique talking about consumer pressure. But then I think how everything is really site-based at the end of the day, the action, and I think we'll come back to that in a moment. And Bill, you're right to correct me. I shouldn't have framed this as a challenge. I should have framed it as an opportunity, because that's the positive thing to do. So thank you for that. But Anne, you come from this. You come at this from a different point of view, from a different suite of drivers. And I think the USA is really good in some aspects of wildlife conservation. We don't call it biodiversity in this country too much, but what do you think about the challenge of moving beyond where we are right now in terms of the approaches that we've been taking in this country?
Thank you very much, Margaret, and I do appreciate being part of this panel. I guess the first thing that one has to admit is that we have seen a lot of evolution of how we approach biodiversity conservation or species conservation in the US. A lot of it was driven by the Endangered Species Act. That's the hammer and the carrot out there. But I think what we have recognized is that some of the original thinking about how you address species, setting up protected lands, public lands mostly, or single species by species restoration have almost limited success. And in fact, I think we've seen a migration to the value of having private lands be part of the solution through voluntary practices and incentives and creating those incentives. We've also seen the approach from moving from single species to multiple species to habitats. So WHC is very well positioned for that because we recognize that if you can get the habitat right and you have a healthy habitat, you have multiple species that will benefit from that. So I think it's really been a change that has happened as is an evolution as we've learned more, and this is part of the science that's needed to keep evaluating those particular pieces. I think with regard to especially private land engagement, it's recognizing that it's not just the polar bears and the charismatic endangered species that we need to be thinking about, that there are many different species out there that contribute to the quality of our ecosystems. And so recognizing that places like your backyard and your birds and butterflies in your backyard effort, this is something that people all of a sudden realize, oh, I can do something about this. This isn't somebody else's problem. I can be part of that solution, whether it be an individual homeowner or a company or a state or some other entity. I think the other evolution we've recognized is that urban spaces actually do contribute, developed lands do contribute to biodiversity goals if you can build it into the planning. This year has really created a lot of challenges for us, but one of them is recognizing that we need personally space to get out and to engage not only with other people, but also with nature and the value of being with nature as a quality of life opportunity. So as we think about developed sites, how can we manage them for not only human interaction, but also gaining from the potential for species recovery, extending species ranges, being very mindful of that as we create these green spaces. So to me, all of those just reflect that we are changing how we approach species recovery and species diversity, even as we value those protected lands, being able to work across different landscapes. The other thing I want to just briefly touch on, and I wanted to respond to something that Bill said, that there's biodiversity, but there are all these other environmental issues. I think increasingly we're going to recognize that stacking of being able to monetize and stack these ecosystem services that include water and diversity and recreation, and you just get this hierarchy. Dealing with them one-on-one is not as valuable as dealing with them as a set, and that if you can achieve restoration of habitat, you might be able to get multiple benefits from that. And how would we approach it? I think it's a really tremendous opportunity, not only for the environment, but frankly for economics. And coming from RFF, that's something we really care about.
That's great, and thank you very much for that. Bill, I think you probably have a response to Anne on that, but before you do go there, what I want to pick up on is, we talk about the ESA as both a carrot and a stick, but we also talk about supply chains as being both a carrot and a stick. And the work that Wildlife Habitat Council has been doing with the Suppliers Partnership for the automotive industry is absolutely 100% a carrot. It's an organic carrot, actually. That's how good a carrot it is. But there are also sticks in the supply chain. And how do you see the supply chain as playing that role with respect to a kind of thinking about biodiversity?
So let me come back to my opening comments and talking about the electronics, the automotive sector, but a whole variety of manufacturers are are part of it. It's the Responsible Minerals Initiative. And in fact, I think somewhere less than 10, but it's more than 5 WHC members are part of that initiative. That initiative came up with that early 32 topics. And to Anne's point, there is linkage between those topics. While biodiversity is one, community, recreation elements, are part and parcel of some other elements. And when you think about how you define what is a responsible material, all those elements come together, and really it ties to Anne's point. And if you think about where we are from a business as well as the communities where we all reside, there are conversations going on right now around the globe, whether you want to use the phrase build back better or you want to use the phrase build forward better. A lot of that is linked to, as Anne said, economic development. It's linked to community. And think about how community and biodiversity go together with education from a certification perspective, right? And so, there's an opportunity to articulate the value of your products, the materials you produce, by combining all these things. And then the question is, within the supply chain, what are the end users of our various materials asking us about? And I still think we're in the early days of those conversations. That some of us are having, more detailed conversations with our big suppliers. So here's the truth statement here. So Dominique's company is a significant supplier to our organization. And a number of our suppliers have come to us and said, so how do we help you improve your sustainability conversation? What are we doing that helps you? And likewise, we're starting to have those conversations, down the value chain, not, with first-tier customers, but, we're already having those conversations with the ultimate consumer, the auto folks in particular, the electronics folks in particular. But connecting the dots between us and them is still that significant opportunity. And so when we think about how we articulate biodiversity, and as we all start trying to help each other, I think there's huge opportunity here for being able to link all those things, consistent with what Anne said, within the whole value chain. And Dominique will touch on some things that will be coming out of Europe, near and dear to my heart, that could reinforce this. So I think we're in the early days. I think this is going to grow in the next 2 to 5 years. This is going to become a much more significant part of our daily conversations.
Super. Well, I hope it does, because it needs to. And, I think what you're talking about with the supply chain and what you just kind of lined up Dominique to talk about is it's not just a industry supply chain, but it's kind of, in a sense, a governance supply chain because of the multinational aspect of the work that you all do. And what I want to hear from Dominique is what is coming out of Europe that multinational organizations need to be aware of in terms of maybe just sticks. I'm not sure if there are any carrots in that, but oh no, there are carrots, I think. So what's up with Europe right now?
Well, actually, in Europe, in this period of time, we see many elections at city level, at European level earlier this year, in countries such as Belgium last year. And what we see mostly everywhere is that the Green Party, the ecology politics, literally are taking a momentum. They're gaining market share, significant market shares, if I can express it that way. And it creates a kind of action-reaction from parties that would not have put sustainability very high on their agenda before. Now they realize, well, we have to do something when it comes to sustainability, to the environment, to biodiversity. I'm not going into much detail there to cut the long story short, but the fact is that the Green Deal, literally, the European Green Deal, is a reaction to this. It has been elaborated in a very limited number of weeks with Ursula von der Leyen leading the European Commission and some other actors, including the business world, companies such as Solvay and many others. Citizens are pushing for raising the bar when it comes to the environment. So biodiversity being one of the elements among some others, not many others, but among some others. It's about the climate. Europe commits to climate neutrality by 2050. Allocate, just to illustrate, allocate €1 trillion in order to execute, implement the Green Deal. So you have many carrots there, possibly, because that model will ultimately end up in project, research, innovation, whatever, coalition that aims at a better future back, if we may say it so. So biodiversity, sustainability is included in there, with the stick obviously being and due diligence as an example, or the non-financial disclosure framework, forcing companies to report on what they are doing when it comes, what are their impacts when it comes to how they allocate the money, how they spend in innovation, how they spend in capex, what is their impact, and what they do in terms of CO2 emissions reduction, as an example. So you have in Europe, and Europe will also to take its part to reach out with other big nations such as United States, China, and some others. So it's setting a pace for a big ambition, allocating money, having the framework in place to report, and at the same time, biodiversity being as, I would say, as important as any other topic. I cannot hear from people there, well, publicly, biodiversity is important, and they're walking the talk when it comes to reducing and positively restoring the biodiversity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dominique, I think the movement of the Green Party, as you say, they're increasing market share, is certainly a symbol of something significant happening across Europe, which is great to see, and what's coming in the future. And I know we were going to talk a little bit about IPBES, but I have a question that came in from our good friend Doug Reed-Green at BASF. Doug said that he agrees with your stacking approach, which is nice to know. And he said they've had great success with stacking natural resource damage mitigation with their conservation issues. And his question to you is, how do you see environmental justice issues providing another element of stacking when it comes to, I say, NRD and conservation, if you think you can talk to that?
Oh, wow. A great question. And it's, I think, something that while we've been talking about environmental justice, actually, I think of it more as environmental equity. It's really just mushroomed in terms of the visibility for very obvious reasons. And I think it's part of the dialogue is how, if you look at a landscape, or if you're looking at a property, or you're looking at your supply chain, and you're asking questions about how does this set of activities affect A, B, C, and D, just being deliberate about asking the question on where does it, how do you recognize environmental equity as part of that footprint? Certainly, it is true that if you can help design a system for efficient, high quality water that contributes to a particular community, that you're right there speaking to how do I optimize the potential around that water delivery system or the green spaces into the communities that are really struggling or imbalanced in how we approach that. And a really good example, I hate to use my home city all the time, but it's true. you go to the northwest part of DC and it's green and it's wonderful, and we have all these lovely ways to manage wastewater, et cetera. And you go to the southeast, there's no trees, there's a lot of poverty, and being able to create a system that recognizes both. So I guess the short answer is just recognizing that it is part of the landscape of things that we want to accomplish and being very deliberate about it. So I don't know if it's Doug's questions, but that's my off-the-cuff thinking.
Yeah, I'm sure Doug's probably going to do a follow-up at some stage, knowing Doug. So, but no, I think that's a really great question. And we're getting to the end. This panel's gone by really quickly, which it did yesterday in our conversation. But I have a great question from Randy Westmoreland from DTE. And he says, and I think Bill or Dominique or both of you could look at that, what kind of supply chain biodiversity metrics and measures are being looked at? Bill, are you into the weeds yet in the initiatives you're in? Is it something like, how many pollinator plantings, how simple or how complex are they looking at that you're seeing? And then I'd like to just pop over briefly to Dominique, because then we got to keep going.
Okay, so for us, because we're in the extractive sector and our footprints are quite large, it comes way up real fast, and it's really focused on the conversation around implementation of the mitigation hierarchy relative to habitats being impacted. And while historically that's been around critical habitat, again, tying back to Anne's comments around ESA, the conversation is starting to shift towards all habitat. And part of that dialogue and stakeholder expectation is around measuring the objective of no net loss. And that is incredibly difficult to measure and sustain depending upon where you are in the world. So it's not as detailed as, give me acres of pollinator habitat, but think about it in a landscape level, mitigation hierarchy and conversations around no net loss.
Okay, great, thank you for that. Dominique, do you have any thoughts on the metrics and measures around biodiversity?
So we at Solvay, we do not try to measure biodiversity. We measure the pressure on biodiversity, as I explained, which is a little bit different, but not that different at the end of the day, because it's kind of overarching metric, if we may say so. So in supply chain, we have identified the four main causes: climate change, acidification, eutrophication, and marine ecotoxicity. Sorry. So we will favor the raw material and the supplier that will have the minimal impact or help us to deliver on those impacts. So it's looking at the supply chain down upstream in that case, and we look at with a eye on the environmental footprint at the end of the day of all what is done there.
Yeah, great, Dominique, thank you. And I think, for Wildlife Habitat Council, I think one of the reasons that we've been successful is that we've adapted to a number of different metrics, whether it's the number of pollinator plantings or other things like that. And, as you go forward into these complex supply chain initiatives, my advice and my actually request would be to keep it simple, because the people who are operating at the sites are not conservation biologists. So let's always keep that in mind. But so Anne, I just wanted to kind of finish with you, then I'll go back to Bill because he's chair of the board, so give him a little last word. But Anne, you and I were talking about the IPBES, the big report that came out last year, and how that's supposed to be a framework for action. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So IPBES, for those who don't know, is the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. It was designed similar to the climate change intergovernmental platform, but trying to be very policy relevant. So that's, I guess, the first lesson, is that as the various assessments, including one on pollinators, where there were regional assessments, there's the global assessment, those products were very much focused on how do we provide recommendations and information that a policymaker can use. And so the design of the committee work actually included decision makers, including myself early on in the process, as well as scientists and people who can apply, the practitioners at country level who could apply that information. Now, the power of it, other than having these summary for policymakers, is that it now creates a framework of understanding at a regional scale that would enable, if, you know, we really do need to get these things to scale. So from an individual, whether it be a plant or a forest or a farm, you want to be able to look at a larger landscape. The IP best products, because they are regionally developed, allow us to have the knowledge base at that scale. And then you look at some programs like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program of USDA, then that enables the practitioner to work across boundaries to actually, it's an incentive program to be able to achieve conservation goals. So you have both the information platform to drive action, and then you have the actual investment, the incentive structure to be able to do that, which is a really nice balance, I think.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And just as we close out, Dominique, do you have any parting thoughts you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm just follow one from Bill he made earlier. So we are talking about business here, so at least the two of us. And there is no antagonism about economic development and sustainability or biodiversity. So this is going along. We cannot have a sound economic development without taking biodiversity as the other topic at the center of that journey.
Thank you, Dominique. That's words to all of the people on this conference that go straight to their hearts and what they do every day. So you're absolutely right. And, you know, with what Anne said about the IPBES report, you know, can support that. The Green Deal in Europe can support that. The copper industry supply chain can support that. So there's so much that we can do to really to begin to think about mainstreaming and moving forward. But you're absolutely right. And Anne, just any parting thoughts from you before I go to Bill?
No, I guess the only thing that I would add to the conversation is the fact that we are having these conversations at this level where we really are committed to making to practices that actually can accomplish these goals. And I think that's a real tremendous statement to those of you who are involved with the WHC to be able to achieve that kind of action over the long run. So I guess kudos and keep going.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Dominique, for bringing the European perspective. You know, this is the beauty of virtual meetings is we could not have afforded to fly Dominique to Baltimore. So it was great to be able to connect to him today. So thank you very, very much. And Anne, thank you so much for bringing in your unique perspective to this community. I'm sure it's not the last we're going to hear from you. So because you're local, we can afford to bring you to Baltimore. But before we close this panel off, I do have to give room to the chair of the board, Mr. Bill Cobb, for some comments if he would like to make any. Bill.
You know I always do. So let me just tie Europe and ecosystem services in my parting comment. There's a pending EU legislative push on human rights and environmental due diligence that would apply to global supply chains for anything that moves into Europe. And for those of us that sit in the United States, you normally wouldn't think about that, except when your materials actually do find their way over there. And what's interesting is human rights have a very broad element to it. And when Anne said ecosystem services and everything involved in ecosystem services, you know, you think about a basic human right to be outdoors, enjoy nature, access to water, et cetera. And what environment means in terms of this due diligence program, we don't know yet. But for those of us that sit in the United States, the ties to Europe are going to be much closer than we think starting in 2021 and 2022. And the elements that Anne brought to this conversation in terms of thinking about the intersection between nature, community, recreation, all those elements of ecosystem services are going to be incredibly important going forward. And all of this is important at the site level, because that is where the materials start. That's where the manufacturing processes occur. And then the material happens to get on a boat or plane and go someplace else. And so for those of us that are doing our WHC certifications, I think it's going to, become a much broader conversation and a much more robust conversation going forward. And I think, again, the panelists want to say thank you to both Anne and Dominique for participating on behalf of the board. Really did provide, I think, that unique breadth of where this topic is today and where this topic is going tomorrow. My final comments, normally I get to be with Margaret on the platform. We get to do a variety of fun things. Normally I'm wearing a suit and tie. You notice we're working from home. I'm a little bit more casual today. I don't miss the suit and tie, by the way. But I do want to acknowledge, I'm noticing we have 226 attendees for this session, at least on the counter on my screen. Huge success. Thank you for everybody for their participation in this panel. We have a huge registration for the 2 days, exceeded expectations. Hopefully the technology will hold up over the course of 2 days. And as you heard at the start from Monica, take advantage of everything this offers. Chat together. I know we're not together in Baltimore face to face. It's going to be a different, environment for this. Go visit the exhibits and take advantage of all of this. And what I can't do in this, and we can't do over a lunch or a dinner, everybody have fun and celebrate the successes of everything that has been achieved over the course of this very difficult year. So thank you from me. Thank you from the board. Margaret, to you.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yes, we're having a lot of fun here. We've got cookies in the break room, so that's what we're going to do. But I think we may have champagne on ice for after tomorrow. But thank you for those words. And, it's really great to see all the familiar names. It's great to see all the new names. And I hope the new people learn a little bit more about WHC and corporate conservation. And I hope our regular attendees, like the Doug Reed Greens and the Randy Westmorelands of the world, get to connect somehow virtually with us. But you have to come back at 11:30 for our Habitat Project Awards. So this is a part of our awards. We're still recognizing, we're still really trying to support your efforts. So come back at 11:30 for that. And then we've got a great keynote at 1 p.m., which is Jason Ward, who's a birder and host of Birds of North America. And he's got a really inspiring of the moment talk. So in the same way you access this section, you'll need to exit the screen, go back to the WHC Connect event, and we will see you back here for that session, and we'll see you at the awards session at 11:30 for the Habitat Awards. So we'll be cheering for the winners as well as the nominees. But thank you so much and welcome to WHC Connect. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you, Anne, Dominique, and Bill.